If you are a billionaire and you don't care, then ring me, and then you can ring Dimitri second. So when I was at BMS Finance, a senior debt financier, I think I'm going back slightly to your previous question as well, that we invested in a bunch of British independent movies, and the majority of them lost money, and in almost all of our deals we made money. So I think one of the most important things as a producer and as a financier for that matter is doing the right deal, and knowing your tolerance for risk, and knowing exactly which part of your investment portfolio film fits into, and these particular deals that you're doing, where they fit in. Are they the safe low risk bit, in which case you're probably doing senior debt, you're probably financing against tax credits and pre-sales? Are they the high risk, high return bits of your portfolio, in which case most of those will probably lose money, and one of them will be the Blair Witch Project and really break out. So I think for me, moving from one side of the table to the other, it was partly actually prompted by the fact that when I was at BNS, one of the things that I did laterally was to look at the market we were in, which was the UK independent financing market, and to say, okay, so how much money is there out there? Which competitors do we have that are looking to finance these films? How many films in this marketplace are there? How many of them have been successful? And so what is the pool of available high quality product that we can invest in, and how much money is out there looking to invest in that product? And having added up all of our competitors and analysed all of the films from the recent years, it seemed to me that there was actually a lot more money than there was good material. And so I felt that I was on the wrong side of the table, and I wanted to be on the side where there was a shortage. And I think though, when I always, coming into this business, I always thought I was going to be a producer, but I had a family and kids, and I needed to pay the bills, and so I needed to get a job with a salary, and so I worked on the financing side. But at the same time, I also thought that there's this, it's all in the film business that if you're a writer, to be accepted as a writer, you generally have to have written something. To be a director, you have to have directed something. And it seemed like to be a producer, you just had to say you were one and put a script under your arm and kind of walk about. And I felt like I ought to learn a bit about the business, and I ought to learn how the deals were going to be made. In fact, I nearly became an agent at William Morris, but not quite. And so I ended up on the financing side, and I took 20 years, and after 20 years I felt like I understood the deals, I understood sales and distribution, I understood the way the money flows and the value chain in the business well enough that I could then move to the other side of the table and put together propositions for financiers that were going to work. And I just think as a producer, if you don't understand the people that you're presenting to, and you don't understand how they're going to assess your project, then you won't get anywhere. On the other hand, if you can put together a proposition, and I hope that from my background experience I'm able to do this, if you can put together a proposition that answers all of their questions and to which they cannot say no, then you're in the best possible situation.
Julien, just maybe talk a bit about the region here and some of the packages and the deals that come across your desk. And you know, there's obviously a lot of local producers here. They're probably interested in how they can figure out how they can get films financed in this region.
So, I mean, we had this chat a little bit earlier. It's very difficult to explain to up-and-coming producers in the region what it is that investors look for, because people here don't look at movies as a valid investment class. We've actually had to educate clients, investors, high net worth individuals, and explain to them that this is something you can actually invest in. You can make money if you diversify well enough, if you know how to select, etc. This is something that makes money. Having said that, we've only been able to do that with big production, international movies, just because the regional and local movies that we look at are usually much less well packaged. So, most of the time it's someone that's sending you either a script or an idea or something that's very still in its primary stages. And when it's advanced and when there's a cast and package in place, it's either too high of a budget for what the movie can generate, or it's there's no target audience for that, or a lot of the times they haven't thought it through enough. And the problem is, when we go back to your previous question, is that people need to think about this. Producers mostly need to think about this as, this is business. So you have to put together first and foremost a business plan and show how this thing can make money. Because if it doesn't, it's always going to be an industry that's either looking for subsidies or considered like an artistry, etc. If you want this to become a viable business and that can generate pools of capital, because there's a lot of money available. The difficult part is not finding the money, it's finding a good project that can sell itself and can have a chance of actually making profits. It's true that you said earlier the industry loses money or movies lose money maybe as a whole. I don't know the statistics.
They don't actually. I mean, the movie business actually does make money as a whole. It's just
okay.
A lot of movies lose money. It's
right.
like in Silicon Valley, 95% of people who invest in tech startups lose their money, except another 5% really covers everything else. And the film business is no different.
And it's the same. It's not just Silicon Valley. If you go to any country where there's startups in any business, right, restaurants, whatever you name it, the majority fails, but the rest continue and develop just because they've learned how to survive and how to make it profitable. It's the same in the movie business. It's not just a question of having a good story, good script, and a few actors. No, you have to look at what's your budget. Why do you need that high of a budget or that low of a budget? And how can you distribute it? How can you generate money? How can you look at other channels of distribution? And I'm sure you're going to discuss this as well.
I'm quite fascinated. I've spent a lot of time in the Gulf region, and the marketplace here. 300 million people that in the Gulf and Middle East region. And maybe for Dimitri, obviously you're based in France and you make French language, but you also make a lot of international films. And maybe you could give some advice to people in this region about how you're an international producer and you make great content. So the question is, there's a lot of great stories in this region. How do they get those stories out and how do they get distributed?
Well, it's very simplistic, but make it in English. I mean, there's one big issue with any local production, where it be French or Italian, or basically anything non-English, it sells a lot less abroad. So if you're making a movie that's for a limited market, you have to factor that in, and that's where your profitability ratio is different, and also it's harder to edge your risk because basically you have 1 to 3 releases. So if you're going to be serious about making international features, you need to figure out a way to reach audiences beyond your local market. I take an example. My cousin produced a movie called The Artist, and on paper it's the worst possible investment. It's a black and white silent movie, but it's also, because it was silent, oddly enough, way more universal. They had this joke going on as finally the French shut up and everybody loves them, but it's not far from being true. Animation was a breakthrough for me. I don't come from animation at all. I was raised in a family of distributors and producers, and it's very important what you said, which is a lot of producers are just producers and they only take care of their art or whatever that's supposed to be, and just getting the money to get it done. And I think the number one thing is understanding, how you can get distributed, meaning how you can create value for everyone. Because if you have a great product but no one sees it, or you have no guaranteed distribution, it's a huge issue to make any kind of money. But going back to how you can outgrow is figure out what story might appeal, to audiences outside again of your. So my approach to it was, travel as much as possible. And I, in the center of the business world still is, the entertainment world is Los Angeles as far as I'm concerned. There's great new areas to explore, but so I go there, for the past 10 years, 12 times a year basically, and I'm trying to see where we can build bridges. It's probably unreasonable to compete with the majors in terms of their slate, but they more or less abandoned a certain range of movies, and they are developing a lot less. Development money being by far the riskiest money, but it's where you source, and that's where we're supposed to take our risk as producers. And so going back to animation, we realized as a French company that we knew how to do it quite well, and that there were people interested in partnering up with us. So co-productions are a great way of learning how to, work on movies that go beyond the scope of your natural, again, local market. That said, you need to figure out how to not have, an unedible pudding down the line, because you can also have co-productions that end up being just made for tax shelter purposes, where you make a movie in Luxembourg that in Czech for an audience no one knows where.
So do you think some of the regional producers here should think about partnering with people in the English-speaking world to use the success metrics of the films that are made in Hollywood and in Europe to try to take some of those success metrics and bring them here to?
It is the NBA. So not everyone has to play in the NBA, and there's very other successful leagues. But if you don't look at what's being done over there, I think you're blind. You can, if you're going to be a producer of local content, then you need to factor in that your market is limited and your budgets are limited, and mostly what works on a local basis is comedy. So if it's a generalization, but it is fairly true in pretty much all markets. So if you want to be a producer of local comedies, great. I am actually that. I'm doing that as my French slate, and it's been by far the most successful movies that we've done. But if you want to...
So question. So you make very funny movies in French and people like that. But what's given you the drive to go outside of the local markets?
Again, there is great stories, and it's about the material. So we're finishing a movie called The Little Prince in animation, and it's a fairly big movie because it's $80 million, and we actually have our distributor here in the room. And we were able to get it done with no U.S. money per se. There's no U.S. financing, but we have U.S. distribution, and that was instrumental in allowing us to leverage the money from foreign, because people want to know that there's a U.S. studio involved, or that there's distribution of that level. We also have a great American talent package, and that was decisive. So we brought the financing, and it took me a year I pre-sold it to Warner Germany, Warner Japan, a lot of pre-sales of that nature, with Mark Osborne coming out of Kung Fu Panda, the director of and obviously, we had no established track record at that level of animation, but we had markers. We had Paramount, we had Warner's, not worldwide, but we had Mark Osborne. So, if you're going to say, I'm going to make an $80 million movie, you need to have some kind of track record of, and it's not necessarily yours, it's the one you've assembled.
So do you think, that I haven't answered this in a sec, but so maybe the two-tiered approach, if you're in the Gulf region, you should focus on your local market, become really good, become, one of the best producers in the region, but then expand your horizons. I mean, I feel like that's why I'm fascinated, because you do really great French stuff, but also international stuff.
Well, you need to be solid, is my point. Is if you're solid by experience. If you've established a reputation of making money for other people on their deals, and you show up and you say, you know what, now I'm a producer, and I've selected this material, you have a degree of credibility that is higher than if you just showed up. If you can afford not to get paid on your picture, but only get paid if your movie performs, people tend to like that because they say he's, exposed. There's usually, it's interesting that, you'd say a movie loses money and some people made money on the movie. So obviously the talent usually gets paid. I'm saying usually because sometimes the talent can be invested as well or have high exposure to success. But there is a lot of people still showing up on their projects and expecting just, focusing on just raising the budget at any cost. And not to the degree of the producer's zero mole test, but it is funny that, the very, very few people on the only production side in a local market focus on the return they're offering. They focus on how great their movie is, which great, I'll go and see it in the theaters.
There's that old joke is, how do you become a millionaire in Hollywood? And the answer is, you start as a billionaire. So that's one of my favorite jokes. But Ivan, do you want us to talk a bit about your point of view on the packages and just some of the things, expand a bit more what Dimitri's talked about?
Yeah, I think, I guess in a way what you're talking about is relating to the audience ultimately, because we have this business structure that we as filmmakers have a whole chain of intermediaries that we have to get to our end user, to the audience. And I think my particular experience is in the UK market, but it tends to be a pattern that's repeated similarly in lots of local markets, that filmmakers as a whole come up with a brilliant idea and think this is a fantastic idea and this story must be told, and then they work out how much it will cost to tell that story, and then they go around and they try and assemble that much money, and then they make it, and then at some point along the way we think to ourselves, yeah, probably somebody should see this. Who's that going to be? And at that point, you've got a distributor and their marketing people come in and they say, we want to spin it this way and we want to do this, this, and this, and you say, you're polluting my movie, this is terrible, it's not that kind of thing. And there's an odd sort of disjunction between that original creative impulse and then the need to get that film to an audience. And I think that the producers and filmmakers that actually manage that most successfully are those that think about their audience at the very, very beginning. And we have research that comes out in the UK regularly from the British Film Institute, and they look at lots of metrics around performance of films in the UK market, and they look at genre as well. And so they look at the genres that perform best at the UK box office, and then they look at the genres that British film producers produce most typically. And the genres that perform best at the box office are fantasy and comedy, almost without exception. And you can take out fantasy because it's Harry Potter, and that's generally the big US franchise movies that have been, this is British movies I'm talking about, it's the big US franchise movies that have been classified as British for the purposes of getting the tax credit. But so comedy primarily performs best genre-wise locally at the box office, and it's one of the genres produced least by British producers, and British producers produce drama in the main, and that is, on most measures, the genre that performs worst at the UK box office. So we make the most dramas and they make the least money. And seems a bit daft.
Maybe it's a function of the amount of movies also, because if you have too many dramas on average, you're watching too many dramas a year. If you have 3 comedies, everyone's going to watch them. So individually they're going to perform.
And then as a filmmaker, you should look at that and you say, well, there's a gap in the marketplace for comedies, and so that's where I'm going to go. But the impulse is a sort of personal creative impulse to tell this particular story. And it makes it very difficult that this is an industrial process. And I think if you're a car manufacturer, you don't go, imagine this amazing car. I'm just going to make this car, and who cares if anyone drives it? I'm just going to make this fantastic car. People have to drive this car. They don't. They go out and they say, what car do people need? What car do they want? What is the market demand? How many people will buy this car? How much can I charge for it? Therefore, how much can I make this car at all? How much do I have to make it for? How much can I sell it for? And unfortunately for us as creative, committed, passionate filmmakers that want to tell particular stories, film is a very expensive medium, and so we have to address the market from the beginning. And so I think that whether you're working as a filmmaker primarily interested in your local market or somebody that wants to reach the international marketplace, you have to have an idea before you start of somebody else is going to pay for it. Unless you're that crazy billionaire, somebody else is going to give you money to make that movie, and they're going to give you money to make that movie for a number of reasons, either because it's a tax break, because they want shooting in the region, or because it's a subsidy, because they want to promote culture in the region. But for movies that, for the majority of movies out there in the marketplace, there will be an element of commercial money needed to fund it, and therefore those people are putting that money in because they're going to make a profit, or they're going to get people into their cinemas, or whatever it may be. And so we have to address that at the beginning, because if you don't, you're going to have to address it later, and it's going to.
But how many producers really do think that? I mean, Dimitri, do you, as a producer, say, okay, there's a market
first
for
of all,
this?
I've made mistakes, and I do believe it's important to learn from them. I've made some fairly big ones. I'm still a relatively young producer, but when I started off on my first international feature, I was 26, and we made this movie Upside Down, which was a 32 million euro production. And believe it or not, they let us do it. And we got some obviously equity in from a fairly large company at the time called Orange, still a large company, which is a media company that had invested seriously in media. But not that much. They brought in 5 million, and then we got a few pre-sales. But we had a hell of a lot of money from subsidies, from Canada specifically. And the project was great, but we had no experience of executing a bank closing of that level. So, for example, we started off and the level of the currency in Canada was at 142 for the euro, and it ended up being 125. So we lost $4 million there. We had no real Americans on the project, even though the movie was in English, and that proved to be, a huge deal down the line because, there is just certain cultural specificities that if you don't have, if you're not raised and living in the U.S. and have an understanding of this local market, you cannot grasp fully. So, long story short, we made the movie. We made no money on the movie. We barely survived it. The bank closing was horrible. We ended up having a movie that had great qualities, but minor issues that were very hard to overcome. And it ended up performing very well in certain regions. It made $10 million at the Russian box office, 18 in China, etc. But where it mattered most, which is the US, and where we had our upside, it had a confidential release. It made money for the distributor there because he ended up buying an asset, for a price that was way, 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 way lower than what we had expected going in. So, there's a lot of stories of talented people that have this capacity to convince one-on-one, and in a way, not game the system, just push it at the maximum. And you exonerate yourself from doing your true due diligence. And then you are confronted with a lot of people in this industry that make money just out of making the movies. And that's where you have the conflict of interest, because people will push you to just get it made, because we had $2.5 million of lawyer fees on the movie. The bankers, there was a completion bond, so technically speaking, they're not exposed. They're very, very happy with this risk. Then you have, obviously, the talent are usually very concerned, but they get paid. So, you get to a point where your objective is just to close and just deliver something. And a completion bond is a very important thing if you have a big budget, but their business is not whether your movie is good. Their business is that your movie is delivered and that you get paid.
So maybe it's worth asking Julien the question. I mean, when you're doing your due diligence, do you actually even consider the marketplace, or do you just really look at if all the financing lines up and the talent and the package lines up? Like you're saying, it looks like a good deal, but at the end of the day, are you really concerned about if it's going to make money or not?
So it's actually the first thing we look at, and first and foremost, it's what matters most, right? So when I mentioned the word business plan, it's a business, right? Every movie is its own little business. It's this little company that's gonna, be created. A product's going to be created, then it's going to be sold. And so the first thing you look at is supply and demand, which Ivan was talking about. Is there demand for such a thing? How big is the demand? How much money can it make? And it's not rocket science because, of course, there's always an element of, you never know what it's going to make, but you'd be surprised at how much data there is out there in terms of box office, in terms of genres, in terms of even distributors. Just by talking to distributors, they can tell you, if you have a good distributor and you ask him, look, within 5 minutes, you tell him I have this movie, this cast, here's what we're thinking, that's the story. He'll tell you, how much this thing can make, more or less. They might be wrong sometimes, but if you ask enough distributors and you talk to enough people and you look at the results of other movies and you compare it and you look at other budgets and you look at, you know, you can kind of figure it out. So it's not completely, you know.
Julien, do you advise anyone to invest in a first-time director?
Sorry, invest
in a movie from a first-time director, or a young director.
See, okay. So a good package has to have strong elements, right? So if one of these elements is a new director or a new whatever, so there's several elements. There's director, there's producer, there's actors, there's story, there's distributor, there's a financing package, so how it structures, and there's budget. So all of these have to create a strong package. If one of them is not, you know, if someone's never heard of the director, maybe it's not the end of the world if that person is talented, if you have some way of figuring out if he's talented or not. But usually if all of these are weak, it's very difficult for any investor to fund this kind of movie. So, but when you have some strong elements, meaning a strong cast or a strong distributor or whatever, so it means that strong element is going to either make up for the rest, or, you know, if a distributor is on board with a new director, they know what they're doing, right? So distributor is not dumb. He's seen a lot of movies. That's his business. He knows. So it's a difficult question to answer. It's on a case-by-case basis. Maybe you have a fantastic story, even if the director is, you know, new but maybe passionate and has skills. But then he needs other elements. He needs someone that understands the business, so a strong producer, someone that has put together a good package, equity.
Yeah, I think if you
pre-sales.
know, if you're a really solid producer with really good chops and background, I think people will back a first-time director. You know, people are looking for something fresh. And if you say first-time director, you know, maybe that person's done music videos, so they might have some directing ability. Or sometimes it's an actor who's never directed.
Yeah.
And that's always an issue that comes up.
So to me, the more important part is the producer, because that's really the CEO.
Completely agree.
Right? So that's really the CEO of the company, right? That's you know, if you think about it in terms of business plan, that's the person driving the business. That's the person that's going to make the financial decision.
Well, here's my question though. So you two producers, how many first-time director projects do you have in your slate?
We have several. I couldn't tell you exactly how many. We have several, and we regularly work with newer directors. It's not always that straightforward, but it's exactly as you said. You find something else in the package to compensate. So somebody came to us the other day, and they were a very well-established theatre director. In fact, they weren't a first-time film director. They'd done films before. It hadn't worked out so well, and it was just fine. You bring Judi Dench, we can compensate for the fact that your last couple of films weren't so great.
Do you have many first-time director projects?
No, I've done a lot. The movie shooting tonight, Escobar is a first-time director.
So tell us about Escobar. I mean, you know, it's playing tonight at 6:30, I think.
Yeah, it's.
Why did you decide to go with the first-time director?
Well, you know, typically again, there was only film professionals involved in making that picture, and my job. Is following a story that I believe in and hopefully making a profit for myself and my shareholders. In this case, the story was great, and the marker we needed was having someone to play Escobar that was as great as the story. And there were only two actors in the world from my perspective, Javier Bardem or Benicio del Toro. So. It was really very binary. If we didn't get one of those two, I wasn't going to be making them picture.
And how did the package come together? I think people would like to hear how the story came about.
I knew that if I could get, same thing as what Julien's saying, is you can make calls, and you have, if you've established ties without making a deal, you can get a sense of whether or not if your package is going to be something that will appeal to your core distributors. So I had a sense that Pathé in that instance and Orange as well would partner that would be interested in making that movie if the talent package was strong enough and special from basically those two guys. I had a feeling also that Canal+, the French HBO, would be interested. So that allowed me to make a pair play offer that would trigger CA's interest in that case, enough that they would agree to meet with a first-time director. You know, that's another way of getting people to trust that he has the abilities, because if a movie star is putting its name on a movie with that much exposure on the role, is that he must have some degree of confidence in that person's abilities. I, didn't consider myself as an established producer, so I was on the asset. I mean, I'm established in France, but as part of the foreign market, I'm still growing, hopefully a little bit bigger now. But what I meant by that is I couldn't just throw my name and say, I'm here. So it took us a while to, get everyone convinced that Andrea, to tell them, was talented enough to make justice to his wonderful script, because he had written the script. And then, I got a degree of involvement on that picture that is way beyond what I usually do, because some movies you are every day on set, and some movies you need to be less present physically. I watch all of the dailies, but because it was in many ways a game changer, making this time around, I felt a movie that could resonate with a lot of audiences worldwide. So there is always a unique aspect. You are, the CEO of that one company, which is this movie, which has different variables from making what is, for example, in Little Prince, a case of an animation tentpole, which has different challenges. In that case, not the movie, but the distribution aspect of it is how do you release more or less day and date a movie of that scope. But in the case of Escobar, the real risk that I took was going without US distribution, which is something that I would not advocate in general, but that I did because I felt that I might have a low return on that picture, but I was establishing a relationship with the director on the long run, and that if the movie would perform okay, it would be the foundation of something for me. So that's not a movie that I would have gone to any business friend in another sector and say...
And do you now have US distribution?
Well, we ended up having US distribution with Weinstein Radius, and they're going to make a lot of money distributing it that way. But and I'm happy for them, because I think if people make money on your movie, they're more interested in making another movie with you.
Who's the foreign sales agent on it?
In that case, it was Pathé and myself. I'm very involved in foreign sales because I don't, again, some people are only meant to be handling the creative, and it's very good, and I've reached a level of excellence in that field. But in a way, they're employees of the movie. They don't take the risk associated with financing it and packaging it. I have both roles, and I don't want to delegate, making the most important deals. So in the case of the US deal or the major markets, you want to be very careful in terms of what's happening, because being a French producer on that movie, France is actually a very small fraction of
and
my
was it
business.
A proper deal? Like, were there bankers involved and completion?
Yeah, I mean, here's again the way I do movies. 100% is covered, so there's no gap per se. The gap is always assumed either by a distributor, which himself has benchmarked the value of the movie on the market. So in that case, it was Pathé and Orange. It's I will not for even question of pressure, I would probably not reach out to financiers for a single movie. I would be very interested, and we're exploring that for a slate, which is, it's interesting what you said, which is if you look and say, okay, I have done research and I have established that comedy locally will perform, and I believe I can source projects to nourish a slate of 10 pictures over X years, I think then you can be normative and you can offer an average amount of return that makes sense. On a movie-by-movie basis, you have to bluntly say to that person, first I'm gonna focus on you not losing money, but your return on that specific movie can be exponential or limited, because it's I started out in this business thinking my first movie was going to be a mega hit. It was okay, and then it took me a while to have a real big hit. But having done those movies before, I was able to craft deals where I actually made money on the hit I made instead of just saying, "Oh, I made a hit."
So Ivan, you worked on the Maryland movie. Do you want to talk a bit about the deal-making process with that, and so the challenges and again how that came together? And maybe I'll ask a banking question after.
How exciting! I'm sure everyone can't wait. Yeah, I mean that deal was interesting because the My Week with Marilyn was financed 70% by the Weinstein Company, and so it was. And actually at the time there was no one else really offering to finance it. And so in terms of negotiating a deal, it's a really dreadful position to be in because you have to pretend that you can walk away and take the movie elsewhere, and in fact you're just sitting there thinking, "Dear God, please do this deal, because otherwise we can't pay the bills." But you pretend and you muddle through. So we had BBC Films as a backer for that project, and they developed it. We tried to get money from the UK Film Council, which still existed at that time, and failed. We had the UK tax credit, which is a wonderful market intervention that works incredibly well. Is very stable and very useful, and really has been, it's been a marvelous innovation in the UK film business. It's extended now to television and to animation and to children's TV. So that was very important to us. And so the Weinsteins came along, and they basically offered us. They offered to. So the budget of the movie was about £7 million. They offered us £4 million for all rights, excluding the BBC rights. And they wanted to take the tax credit themselves. The tax credit was worth about £1 million, and so we basically had to hustle them up to £5 million without the tax credit. So in terms of their exposure, we got close to doubling what they were, what their exposure was, which we were proud of that, especially given our weak negotiating position. And then we financed the tax credit ourselves. So I was just leaving BMS Finance and joining Trademark. We borrowed money from BMS. We lent it to the production at a higher rate and took a margin on that ourselves. And then I also, because the point of this movie, from the financing point of view, was to make enough money up front that I could leave my job at BMS and become a producer, which I'd wanted to do for 20 years. So it was kind of, personally important.
So did the film make money? That's the question.
The film made money, and not for us. So we knew that because of the deal making that we were doing, we would get a certain amount of money into the company. We got £550,000 into the company from that movie up front, and we knew that we would never see a single penny, because all of the rights were going into a multi-territory distributor, and it was the type of movie that would have an Oscar campaign, and so there would be an enormous black hole, and all monies would fall into that black hole forevermore. And so it's turned out.
So it was a good kind of reputation maker.
Yeah, it served a specific purpose, and we achieved that purpose. And, as you said, it's true, you give stuff away, but I think the key thing as a producer, for that matter, as a financier, as any deal maker, is just know what you're giving away. If you're going to give stuff away, don't do it accidentally. Do it deliberately to achieve what you need to achieve.
I want to echo that, because if you actually really do your due diligence and you look at what you actually own of your picture, there's a way where you can say, I have 100% of back end. And because the distribution rates are, 40% plus P&A plus whatever they'll find, that ends up being zero. And it's important that in the process of and the passion that you bring into making a project exist, which is, arguably, it's logical that it should be difficult to get a movie made because it is a fairly expensive venture, but that you don't lose focus on why you're doing it. So if you are making a risky movie, and if it's your first, if it is a game changer, and you are contemplating making trade-offs, but in general, you need to figure out a slate of movies that will be able to sustain your company's overhead and you growing as a producer and getting more solid. So I would strongly advocate that in general producers that have established themselves raise capital so that next time around they are able to be stronger in their negotiations. It's always on a case-by-case basis, but again, on the last movie I closed, which was Little Prince, that was, because it was $80 million, we had, obviously high financial fees on the picture, and because we had assets from previous movies, catalog, we were able to put it as collateral in the process of closing. When we knew we were close, but the banks only want to intervene once they're really close. So instead of having bridge loans that can be extremely violent, because there are people that in this industry that navigate and just wait for a really desperate guy to show up and say, oh, I'll lend you the money, but I'll lend it to you for 12, 13, 14% a week. Stuff like that does happen, and you have no other choice because he's
Julien
the only
got
one.
all excited about those numbers.
Yeah, no,
per
but
week.
18%.
yes, no, but there's you have stuff where a normal banker won't spend the time to analyze it, where you're 100% viable. You just need money for a month, but you're closed. It's just a processing thing. And for some reason, you got into way ahead of yourself, and so that happened to me on Upside Down. That happened to me where I was 6 million euros out. I knew I was closed. The movie's 32, and the money was there. But there was a guy in Canada making our lives impossible, even though he already had $1 million in the movie, about clauses that made no sense. So the lawyers kept on, the lawyer clock kept on ticking, so that was money out. The currency was going down, and we had no money to cover it. And I had the crew already working. And I remember very well being on set with fire trucks. It was a fairly big movie, and a house that we were, setting on fire many times, and wondering if we were going to close. And finally said to everyone, you know what? I'm going to shut down production if you guys don't shut up and close. So this is not a position you want to be in. This is not. You need muscle. So because of how the film industry works, you can be a fairly undercapitalized company, but if you got a great project and the right people, get the paper that you can cash flow discount early on, that is doable. But usually where you end up is you've packaged it, you've made it happen, but you don't have the right deals. So that's where, and that's my interest is also in participating in this panel, is hearing about, how do we, in the realm, which is a non-major realm where they do their slate financing, but how do we professionalize that field and create a track record that allows us to go to seasoned investors and say, look, if you invest in what I do, and not specifically that one movie, but in general, and if I have your muscle, the muscle you're going to bring me, I'm going to do what I'm doing better, and that's going to be more profitable for all of us.
Yeah, I'm going to open up the floor for some questions, but the one thing we didn't talk about too much was crowdsourcing, because there's actually a panel about crowdsourcing, and I also think the impact of technology on distribution, things like VOD and all the different sort of windows of we didn't really bring that into the deal making. I wanted to focus more on the guts of getting the productions made. So when people do ask some questions, maybe we can sort of allude to the whole technology impact of financing and deals. Are there some questions out here? These are world-class producers. You got a chance to ask some good questions. The billionaire in the front row.
Thank you. I do understand almost everything that you say, but the core of what you say, that it's a business. On the other hand, film is still hopefully and will hopefully be always also art. And it has to follow also other I'm looking for the word, rules than just the ruling of money and making profit. And I think that film, in particular, has a very, very high responsibility in terms of social responsibility, political responsibility. You were saying paying the bills because you have family and kids. I'm sure that's true for you and maybe for you too. But the responsibility that we have for kids, meaning future societies, is much more.
What's the question?
Is much more than just money. Right now we are in a political situation where we have to respond to many other problems as well. And do you ever also include those thoughts in your plannings?
Look, first of all, this is a panel of producers, so distributors would have directors would have obviously a different approach, and it is there is very positive things that come from conflictual exchanges between a director that will always want more and his approach to the material and what our responsibility is, which is, if you want to compare it to, I'm going back to real estate, is you have architects that are artists, and at the same time they need to deliver a building that's functional. So there is definitely an exchange. It so happens that our medium is expensive. The companies, for example, to say that Participant is a company that has decided to be to have a social reasoning.
They have a social responsibility.
But they're basically a nonprofit, or Jeff Skoll decided that having made $4 billion out of eBay and more money out of other investments, that he could, allocate money towards making movies that have a social resonance. I honestly care about making great stories. So great stories can be about a variety of topics, and I don't think it is either my job or my pleasure to, I would be in politics otherwise. I think if you do want to have a significant impact, choose a field where you're most efficient. As an artist, a director can have whatever motive he wants to have, and I've never fielded the exchange and saying I just want to be in that realm. I'm just now at a point where if I'm going to be engaging in a movie, I don't want to lie to myself or lie to everyone involved. If you are going to be making a movie that is a guaranteed money loser, and there's always the exception, you should know it, is my point. And sometimes they do happen because they are very important. So these are the movies specifically that usually get made because either, let's put away the crazy billionaire, they get subsidies from, in France, for example, we have systems of subsidies that are meant to help movies that have very little commercial appeal. And it's great, and it allows to generate a talent pool that we can tap into making other movies, because it is about sincerity from the people that are involved. Again, our role is to, first of all, make sure that the movie gets made, but that it's viable. So
it would be interesting to hear just Julien's. I mean, it's a good question about art and movies, but I think
I'd like to add. I mean, obviously, all of what you're saying makes sense, but I'd like to add that these two do not necessarily always conflict. I mean, you can be socially responsible and still make money if you know how to package it well. And so,
Participant makes money, actually.
We're actually, it's funny you mentioned
debatable.
It's funny you mentioned Participant.
Private company.
We're actually invested in a movie, and Participant is our co-investor.
They've made a lot of movies on some projects. I'm thinking as a whole, making only those kinds of movies.
But sometimes these two do not conflict. So it depends. I mean, going back to that business plan, CEO, etc. You can have someone running the actual project as a viable business that can generate money, but the content can be something very socially responsible. The artistic direction, the director, the actors, etc. can be very creative. This has nothing to do with how you structure it and finance it and distribute it. So these two can go hand in hand sometimes. And also you have sometimes movies that really just have to be made regardless of whether they make money. And there's people for that too. There's subsidies, and there's also, rich people that actually care about these things and give out money. So this does exist, but we're more talking about the majority of movies, which in order to have a viable industry, you need to have these movies be profitable, or at least be, when they're presented, have a chance of being profitable, and not just, you look at it and you say, this will never make money, and so it's impossible to finance it.
So one last quick question, and then we're going to wrap up.
Sorry, I hit the mic first. My name is Mr. B from South Africa. and we come from quite an interesting filming industry which is developing, which is growing and booming. I have a very simple question. In terms of the budget, in terms of the percentage of the budget that you spend in marketing your films, particularly, I'd like to hear from each panel member. And then of that budget spend, how do you spend, or where do you spend most of it? Do you spend most of it in TV, in radio? It's just a quick question.
Do you want to talk about the marketing side of?
It depends film by film, but we don't generally control that. It will be the sales agent and the distributor that will spend that, and our job is supervising that and making sure that it's deployed appropriately, because ultimately it's our money that they're using as well. So I'm not sure. The rule of thumb for Hollywood movies seems to be you spend 100% of the budget. For us, that it's not generally the case. But I don't think I could give you specific figures. And as I say, film by film, there are huge differences. And I think what we didn't touch on, which is a shame, is as Phil said, is changes in technology, changes in distribution technology, changes in marketing technology, specifically crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, going directly as a filmmaker to your audience. And I think that's going to have a massive effect on the amount of money that people need to spend and the way that they spend it, and also the way that we fund our movies. And so I think that whatever the answer would be to that today will be different next year, will be different in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years' time.
But it's really, really important to control the amount of P&A and how it's spent. On the one end, you really want to have your movie out there. So if the new model now that a lot of distributors have, which is VOD and theatrical at the same time, or just VOD, might be really, really good for them, but for you down the line, as a producer, could be an issue. On the other hand, if you have uncontrolled spend, basically, if your movie's a winner, like the case with Maryland, they'll keep on spending because they generate a commission and never send you any overages. So as a producer, already thinking ahead of how you're going to be marketed and in what conditions and what degrees of approval you have is a big issue. So it happens a lot that you didn't think about it, your movie actually happens to be a winner and you're powerless. And they will do it, They will spend the money that they need to spend so that it's more profitable for them. So that's very interesting that you get to figure out ways. And in France, there's a system which is, we have this rich tax in France, but we have a tons of, which, it's not the smartest thing we've done, but it's there. And to offset that, people who are exposed to this rich tax have ways of reinvesting, and one of them is towards cinema. So usually the way they invest is they say, we don't want to just be putting up monies in the gap or the movie's budget. We also want to be putting up some of the P&A. And that has evolved into, and because the P&A spend in France is a lot lower than what you'd have in the US, because we don't have any TV ads, it's not 100%. Basically, it's another 20%, which is sizable, but enough that you can plan it ahead. And that means that sometimes you can invest your overhead and your producer fees, or the portion that you've deferred, inside of that P&A pool and gap pool, and recoup it from really first dollar. And you control what's actually happening. So there are many ways, and crowdsourcing is one of them, where you can get involved and control beyond just the scope of just the actual production.
Get a bigger bang for your buck.
Our experience has been 20 to 50%, depending on the movie, but obviously sometimes can go higher. But also it's important, like Dimitri was saying, to have some kind of control as to how much, at least when they spend a certain amount, anything above, for the producer to have a say, or the investor. Otherwise, we've had instances where the movie was successful, but the distributor spent so much that for the investor it wasn't so great, and they shouldn't have spent that much. Obviously, you can get caught into these things.
I guess we have to wrap up. We're a little bit over. So anyways, I'd like to thank all the panelists for your time and coming all the way to Dubai, and thank you for the audience for listening. Thank you.